back in the day, it was such a comfortable place to be in television because everyone was mindful of how things were being presented over the air. And every studio had something called standards and practices.
This is the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast, helping filmmakers who share a Christian worldview stay in touch, informed, and inspired. Quiet on set. Rolling. Today's host is Jaclyn Witt.
Welcome to the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast. My name is Jaclyn, and I'm excited to be speaking with Leilani Downer today. This is the second part of our interview. So if you go listen to the previous episode, you'll get to hear her backstory, how she got into film and television, and her journey was very unique and interesting. And so I encourage you to go listen to that if you haven't already. So today I want to get into some of the actual strategies and writing techniques and how do you write episodic? How do you write for television? And so if you could kind of maybe help me out with understanding maybe the evolution of where things have gone, because I know that things in the 80s and 90s were done differently than they are today. Can you help me understand some of the differences?
Sure. Hi, Jaclyn. It's nice to be back. So, yes, it's a different world in a sense. In the 80s and 90s, television wasn't as huge as it is now. You know, they're saying that we're in a golden period of television. There's so much out there. There's so many avenues of seeing things. You've got the streamers and you've got networks and you've got cable and all of the things. There's just too much stuff. But back in the day when I started, there were only 3 networks. And eventually, actually, really, there became 5. There was the Warner Brothers, WB, and there was the CW. And then there were the traditional ABC, NBC, CBS. And, you know, for writers, the struggle was trying to get into one of those networks, because if you miss those, the chance of you getting a job or getting staffed would have to wait till the next staffing season. And there are staffing seasons in the business. Usually in the spring, they start staffing for shows that start being viewed in September. No, that's the old model, because nowadays staffing is, even though that's traditionally the staffing season, staffing happens all the time because you're not dealing with September premieres. I don't know if you remember back in the day, Jaclyn, when they used to say, oh, these shows are coming. And it was a big tradition. It was a guide, would have full spreads and all the shows and things like that. So that was back in the day. Today, it's a lot different. There's so much opportunity out there for writers and for writers to create space for themselves in the entertainment industry. In working with shows, it's good to know what broadcast or traditional network show might look like as opposed to a streaming show. Streamers kind of lend themselves a little bit toward the skills you have for being a feature writer. In writing those scripts, you're not writing toward commercials. There's no commercial breaks. And page counts pretty much stay the same for half-hour to 60-minute shows or half-hour to full-hour shows. Page counts change all the time. I don't know if you've ever watched a Netflix show, and some of the minutes are, one show can be 32 minutes, another one can be 45.
Yeah.
They have the ability to do that. But in network television, we were a little bit more stuck with the minutes we could work with and make sure that we had the act breaks at the right places so that the commercials could run. And theme songs were big for shows back then. One thing I do want to point out, since, you know, this is a lot of us here are strong in our faith and know God. Back in the day, it was such a comfortable place to be in television because everyone was mindful of how things were being presented over the air. And there was, every studio had something called standards and practices. And they would read the scripts and they would make sure that they were wholesome as much as they could. So you didn't hear a lot of cursing. There wasn't a lot of innuendos that were out there. It was very, very rare and very shocking when it happened.
Yeah.
And when Fox Television came along, that was another network that came on the horizon. They started doing more and more things that were a little on the edge. And we would hear rumors about it on our shows, like, you know, they let them say this over at Fox, you know, that kind of a thing. So as a Christian going into television in the 90s, it was a comfortable space.
Mm.
I teach at Asbury University, and I teach my students how to write half-hour situation comedies. And I do it from a perspective of spec scripts. And we talked about that the last time I was on air, the difference between a spec and a pilot. A spec is you're just mimicking what's out there, finding a show you love. I always say find the show you love because you can write that. And as opposed to a pilot where you create everything yourself. So when my students are looking for spec scripts, they have a hard time because they come back to me. They say, there's so much cursing. They're using the F word. They're doing this. They're doing that. And we have to figure out, okay, how can you approach this and yet show people you know how to write for that show? And there's one, I won't say what the show is, but there was one particular show where the characters used F words all the time. And I told my student that I was teaching, I said, think about the character. Is that a character trait that character has? Do they curse all the time like that? Or do you think that that's something that the writer decided to do just to kind of pump it up? And if it's the writer, which it was, because if you looked at the show, it wasn't a character trait.
Yeah.
I said, as a writer yourself, think creatively how you can express that person's anger or that person's shock without going to the same word over and over again. And I said, things like using the word dude. Come on, dude.
Exactly. Like no matter what the word is, you need to come up with variety.
Variety. Yes. Use your words. So that's the difference a lot from when I started, and then just being creative and showing people, yes, I can write. I am a strong writer. I'm not going to just, gotta be servicey. I'm going to write characters that have real feelings and say things that we would recognize in the real world, but I can do it in a more creative way to get around the things that I want to write for.
And I know I've seen that too, where I've been watching a show and all of a sudden, like this character that had never used foul language in previous episodes. In this episode, it's like 5 times. I'm like, what is this?
Yes.
And so I know as a writer, I'm like, well, I guess that's the writer's way of writing this character, but that's not the character itself.
No.
And then for episodes after that, it's gone back to the original. And so, like you can tell every now and then there's a writer on a project that they use language that the writer is familiar with rather than the characters.
Exactly.
Because this character in the other episodes does not have that vocabulary.
Right. And if you are speccing something, maybe you can get a little creative and do a storyline where the character says, I'm not going to use foul language. The storyline is part of that. And that's his struggle.
Yeah.
It could be a B story. The difference between an A story is what carries the entire episode. And then you allow for your supporting cast or the cast to which the episode is not about to be involved in a B story. And you could do something of that nature to kind of get around that whole thing. But it's just being creative and figuring it out.
It's like it's the catch, not the goal. So
Exactly.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the pieces of advice, I guess, for writers wanting to get into writing episodic is to write an episode, like a spec script, for something that's already written, or to write the pilot. And then is there anything else that would be a benefit for writers if they're wanting to, let's say if they're wanting to get hired as a writer, or even if they're wanting to produce their own, what are some pieces of advice that you would give?
Well, I do believe that there's a lot more opportunity for writers out there and ways of doing things. If you're interested in producing something of your own, first of all, if you're interested in episodic television, whether it's streaming or traditional television, please be a student of it. Watch it. Some people, they want to be doing this, but they don't know what's out there. Be aware of what's out there and what's kind of popular and where the trends are going, because there's definite trends in television that happen. And when a show is very hot, people kind of want to go there. And that's not to say that you have to totally, take something from somebody else, but you do your version of it if you're writing a pilot. And pilots are a little harder to write because, as I said a little earlier, you're creating characters that live in a world that's never been seen before. So anyway, I would say watch episodes. I would say also read scripts. There are several online sites where you can get scripts for free. And I would go there and download some scripts and start reading them. As to getting your work seen and heard and all of that, there's a couple things you can do. I'm not shy about writers kind of entering into festivals or into contests, writing contests where they start to let others know what they're doing. And so that's helpful. Coverfly was an organization that did that a lot online, but I think they're going away.
Yeah, that's what I've heard.
There'll probably be someone to fill that space, but give yourself the opportunity and the courage to start getting your work out there in whether it's at festivals that are taking writing, just the written word, or some kind of training program. I would do that. Secondly, don't be shy about maybe creating something of your own. I was just in writers always are learning, right? So I was just in a seminar where they were talking about doing podcasts. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with Issa Rae, and that's how she got started. She's an actress that got started by doing a podcast, and then she got a series on HBO because of it. The name is escaping me right now. But there are things that you can do to get noticed. And the networks are looking at podcasts, and they're looking to see what's out there, because they want to, it's like looking at books and trying to figure out what book you want to make into a movie. The networks are looking at, and the studios are looking at what podcasts can be made into series or YouTube things. YouTube is the most popular streamer out there. And, that's most people are watching YouTube. You could also do a little sizzle on YouTube or start a conversation on YouTube for your writing. And then the other thing is, I know that a lot of you don't live in Los Angeles. The benefit of Los Angeles is that there's a lot of access out here. There's always something going. You can go to a seminar, some kind of networking event that is open for people to come to. In your towns where you work, that could happen as well. You could hear something going on, whether it's associated with the university or in the community. I would get out there and try to get relationships and tell people what you're doing. Because most of the time when people, from my experience, when they're looking for a writer, they don't know a lot of them, but they know who they know. And so that's why networking comes into play. Also, don't be shy when you write a script to start pursuing an agent or a manager. And that agent or manager can be in Los Angeles, even if you're not. I know a friend who in Oklahoma who just not only got into the WGA, but also got an agent from Oklahoma, and he's not planning to move to Los Angeles anytime soon. It helps to have some footprint in LA though, and he does now because he has an agent. But you can easily write something that you love, that you believe in, and find an agent that's taking on new clients. And they're out there. You have to do some research. And for me, when I worked on my television show, I knew the agents because they were representing my writers that I was working with. And so I could cherry pick and say, I want to eventually be with that person. I would say if you're a young writer, this is the advice I got, and I think it still holds. Going to a huge agency can be hard, CAA or something like that, because you could get lost. I think working with a boutique agency or a middle agency is a lot more beneficial to a young career. And it's nice to grow with your agent if you can. You don't have to stay with them forever, but it's nice. But there are ways, get your work out there, get it seen. And the other thing, real quick, talk to your professors if you're in school. I sat through a seminar where there was a panel of agents, and they said, you know what, we would listen to a professor if a professor said, this is a good person in terms of writing. I'm not saying that every professor is connected, but talk to the people who are teaching you your craft and see what are their network benefits. And if they believe in what you're doing, they will help.
Yeah, that's a lot of really great advice. I feel like I should be taking notes right now. I love this.
Take your media mountain with Content Christian Media Conference. Join hundreds of filmmakers, actors, screenwriters, podcasters, and authors on September 22nd to 26th at the 40-acre Christian Film Studio, Capernaum Studios in Poolville, Texas. New this year, hands-on training in acting, writing, cinematography, editing, AI, VFX, and more. Grow in your craft with over 45 workshops. Also new this year, a full-day networking event specifically designed to help you make meaningful connections, grow your community, and build your team. Christian Media Conference has a 5-star rating. Go to christianmediaconference.com and discover the long list of world-class speakers, workshops, boot camps, and more. That's christianmediaconference.com.
When we put together the meetups, we wanted to be very strategic with the approach, thinking about the obstacles. Where are those things that would actually make the greatest impact?
I just wanted to say thank you, Jaclyn. You guys having everything so organized. I went on the website last week. I was able to sign up. All the instructions worked. Everything was seamless. And I have not had an experience where it's been this seamless ever. Also, I've already met some amazing people on this. And I love the format. You teach us a little bit, and then we go into a separate group with just a few people. It takes away some of the anxiety if anybody has anxiety about speaking in a large group. And also, I've gotten to really know people beyond just that's your name and your face. And some people I knew already, which is also great because there's so many people here from the industry that just have amazing experience in all areas. I've met writers, I've met actors, I've met producers. Today, I was with somebody in a room who actually does editing, and that was such a great perspective.
Join us on Thursday mornings for our FAF Association meetings. We've got networking opportunities, masterminds, and more. Find the schedule on our homepage at faffassociation.com or find the link in our show notes.
I kind of want to back up again for a bit. I want to ask a few more questions about some of the differences. So I know in the 80s and 90s, the big thing was multicam studio, especially for family sitcoms. And so that is something that I don't know if it's even done anymore. Is that a thing anymore?
Actually, it is back. And you will see it on certain streamers. Netflix will have some multicams, and I believe Disney Plus. But multicams, they do exist. And the fact that if you know how to do a multicam, it kind of is a specialty because they kind of went away, and now they're starting to come back. So you have that specialty, that craft that you know how to do. The difference between multicam and the single cam show is basically what it says. You're going to have 3 or more cameras shooting what's happening on set, as opposed to that one camera that you have to set and move and do all these things with. And usually the multicam shows are done on a stage. The other thing I would say in terms of the writing of a multi-camera show, the formats are a lot different, but also the jokes are harder and faster in a multicam show. Back in the day, it was, on a multicam show, it was 3 jokes to a page. It had to be fast and quick.
Wow. Okay.
And if you watch Fresh Prince, fast and quick, those jokes came. And so it's a skill, and you can learn it. Definitely, you can learn it. With your single cam shows, they lend themselves more toward dramedies, comedies that are a bit of drama in them. I say all shows have drama in them, and I say all shows have comedy, even if you watch it procedural. But that being said, it's a different format. You're working with more cameras. You're doing more like things like cut twos and dissolves and things like that. 3 jokes to a page. Some multicams have openings and tags and things like that around them. Usually multicams, like I said, happen indoors because you can't lug 4 cameras down the street. Yeah. But, it's just an art of writing it a little differently, being creative.
Are there any, let's say, like benefits, whether it be from the writing or the producing side for one or the other?
I think it could be a cost benefit a little bit for the studio itself. You get paid the same for a multicam as a writer as you do for a single cam show. But for, a single cam show, it depends on the style of the show that you're writing, the tone of it. Is it going to be something that, you need to have multiple sets and all of this, and you're doing something where the characters are out and about? When I worked on my situation comedies, it was usually a family show, and it usually took place in the living room or the kitchen. And if you're on a stage, you just move the cameras down the track to go from one staged set to the next. And rarely, if ever, did you see them outside. in a park. If you did, it gave the show a different look if they were outside in a park. So it's just depends on the money that the studio wants to spend. And then as a writer, in your mind, as you're creating the show, what is it going to look like? I created a pilot called Cincinnati's Best. And it was about a guy that he owned a coffee cart in the park. That would not look so good as a multicam because, multicams do look different when they go outside and do those kinds of things. So
you'd probably have to create an outdoor set inside. Make it seem like you're outside, but you're actually inside.
Yes. Yeah. And that's what they did on Friends. Sometimes they were on the street. Where they shot Friends was at Warner Brothers. And at Warner Brothers, there's a street called the New York Street. And they would sometimes take Friends out, but sometimes they would do the sets on stage. And that's huge.
So for people that are wanting to, produce independently, do you have any advice for distribution or even pitching, like for how to get a show picked up, whether it be on streaming or something like that?
I think if you were going to do something independently and you're saying, I have this amazing idea and I'm going to write it and I want to see it done, there's a cost to everything. So you kind of have to figure out what the cost is going to be, even financially for yourself. If you have a group of folks that you consider your people and they're willing to help you, that can help cut down some of the costs and they have skills to help you with it, right? So bring them along. That's what a lot of people do, especially in the early days. Eventually, you want to get to a point where everybody who's working on your projects is getting paid and they're happy and you're all growing together. But in the beginning, you may need to call on some favors, and there's no crime in that. And that's done a lot. And then if you create something, don't be shy about finding space for it on the internet. Like I said, YouTube is one of the most watched streamers. And you can actually put something up there that can catch fire, be seen, and maybe take you to the next level. A friend of mine created something on YouTube and then went on to sell it to ABC eventually.
Wow.
So, and she had to remake the pilot because of it. So you can tackle something like that. It doesn't have to be, even if you do something on YouTube, you don't have to go with the traditional 30 minutes or even hour or whatever. You can produce something that you can handle, even if it's something you can handle financially. And then you can put it on YouTube and be consistent. If you think about people who have had huge careers and worked from nothing, there's a show called It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Those guys created it themselves and then eventually sold it. They didn't let it stop them. Even Keen and Peele, their show, these are a bunch of guys that created a show with different sketches and different storylines. And they eventually sold. I mean, people are doing it. They're getting out and they're saying, when you work in film, you always think, I'm going to write my movie. I'm going to raise the money to make it. I'm going to make it. And then you're still in a position of distribution. What are you going to do with it? Same for television. As TV writers, it's gotten a lot better for us because like I said, there's more places to put your work and you can be creative. You can say, I'm going to make this. I'm going to shoot a couple of scenes. I'm going to throw this on YouTube. And now you've kind of got a couple of shorts out. It's kind of in the vein of a short in a sense, but it's your television. And on YouTube, you can have your own channel as well. It's going to take work. It's being creative. It's almost like self-publishing a book until somebody reads that book and says, this is amazing.
Right, yeah.
They want to pick it up.
So how realistic is it if, let's say, a studio or, someone does want to pick it up, how realistic is it for the original writers to get hired on to continue writing for that project?
Well, as a writer, you always own your IP, your intellectual property. And it is realistic that you can be hired by the studio to continue your work. The only thing that you need to come to terms with is that you may not be the showrunner that first year or even the second year, maybe even the third year. But they can bring you on to a meaningful position on the show as a writer, as the creator. You would always be the creator, but they would maybe pair you up with someone who has more experience in running the show. Because remember, shows are multi-million-dollar properties, even doing it week to week. So they're going to want to rest it in the hands of someone who really knows what they're doing. But you can learn what they learn, because as a showrunner, you're going to have to do everything. You're going to have to, help with the crewing up of the show and getting the actors and all of those things. But a network or a streamer would pair you with someone, and someone would be over you. It could still be your show, and you could still very much be a part of it. But the reality is you may not be running it unless you've had that experience before or been close to that experience.
So for the person who wrote the pilot, are they considered the creator of the series? Okay.
Yeah, and it's interesting with writers. Producers, you have your directors, producers, and writers, right? Those are the three major pillars. With writers, it's hard not to have you around. The Bible says in the beginning was the Word. And, the Word is powerful on the page. I'm not talking about Jesus, but I'm talking about the Word on the page. It's very powerful. And it's hard to knock the writer out. With producers, you sell something, and the producer has to hope they stay on the project. I hope I stay on the project. I hope the writer helps me stay on the project. I hope the director helps me stay on the project. The director is in a different space as well. The director is a hired person usually that comes on. It starts with the writer, and the writer gets it going, creates the idea and the world and all of that. And it's hard to separate them. You are the creation you make.
Yeah.
The other two, they can find their place, but sometimes they don't stay with the project.
Right. That's really interesting and good to know. It's very different talking about episodic features. This is where I've spent most of my experience. And while I have written on some episodic stuff, it was all like very much the startup. But as the projects that I have been working on are getting produced, I'm excited to see where they go. And so I'm taking my own notes here on this whole distribution avenue, and definitely going to share that with the producers I'm working with. This is all very, very good information. I'm sure our listeners are enjoying it as well.
Good.
Leilani, I want to thank you so much for coming on our podcast and sharing your life, your heart, your insights. I really hope that we get to talk with you again sometime and maybe even have you teach a workshop at FAF Association.
I would love that.
Fantastic.
I would. And yeah, like I said, it began with somebody sharing something with me, and I love sharing what I do with others too.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you so much. God bless.
Thanks for listening to the Faith and Family Filmmakers podcast. If you've been enjoying this podcast, take a moment to follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast player so you don't miss an episode. And if you'd like to support the production of this podcast, you can leave a tip at faffpodcast.com/support. Bringing filmmakers together for faith and family.